Hey guys, today I want to officially demo um, the Fire NFX version 2.0 script for the Akai Fire MIDI device. As of this recording, I'm going to claim to you that this is the most advanced MIDI interface for FL Studio. And I'm going to show you the features I have so far. I have more features planned, and just get the ball rolling. So basically, when you're using the Akai Fire, you can use the official script, and you get all the features that the official script would give you. With my version of the script, I've changed a few things. I've taken out some things and I've added some things. But it works for me in a better way than the official one because, for one, I don't use step mode. So there is no step mode currently in Fire NFX version 2.0. Instead, I use mine not as a performance device, but as a creative tool and control surface interface. Help me make music, not to perform music. Okay. And with that said, this device, the way I have programmed it, works best with a keyboard that is a piano style keyboard that it can work together with. So you could play your piano keyboard, but use the Fire to do navigation, maybe play some chords for you, some other things that you're going to see to help you to create music. Okay, that's the goal here. So with that said, I'm going to demo to you the current modes that Fire NFX version 2.0 supports. Before we get into the first mode, I just want to point out a few things about the device that work the same as the original script. So if we were to look at the device, you could see I have a slide above my live feed. My live feed is there. You could see my hand. That's the live feed. But above there, you can see I've taken a picture of my Akai. And I want to point out a couple of things about it just to make it clear. I have a few stickers on my Akai. I have one here, and I have one here. Okay, the one here above what would normally be the step button says pattern because I don't use step mode. I use what I call pattern mode. So that's what that's there for. This one here is just to remind me of the function of these round buttons because these round buttons aren't used for muting the tracks anymore. Okay, so that's just what those stickers are there for. I also have lines I've drawn around the 4x4 banks. If you look at the live feed down here, you could see I've colored the banks in different colors just to indicate what I mean when I say banks. So when you visualize the layout this way, you can quickly find the pads you're looking for. Like if you were looking for row 3 or 4, it's easy to find. But if you're looking for pad 7 or 8 within that row, it would be harder to find it without these lines, if you know what I mean. The pads kind of get blurred as to where's 7, where's 8, where's 9, for example. You know, the ones that would be in the middle here are harder to identify without the lines I've put. I just want to point that out because these lines kind of led to how I programmed it moving forward. So when I talk about these things, you're gonna understand why the lines are there. Let's talk about quickly the knob controls. The knob controls in Fire NFX version 2 work the same as in the original script. And that is to say, you can click the button to move between different modes, and then those modes would indicate what functions these 4 knobs next to them would have. The first 2 modes, channel and mixer, operate as labeled across the top. Volume, pan, filter, and resonance for channel. Volume, pan, low EQ, and high EQ for mixer. User 1 and User 2 modes will give you 4 knobs in each mode to link to parameters as you want to. If you wanted to link to a certain plugin's parameter, you could use user mode 1 or user mode 2, and then you would have up to 8 of these controls to use. Next is the pattern button up and down. That works the same. It takes you to the next or previous pattern. We also have the display here. The display will look different, but it's used to display information about the current modes and how it's operating. And also anything that you might be tweaking. For example, if you were tweaking the volume, you would see the volume in decibels listed in there. Next, we have the browser and select button. These are not currently implemented. There are plans to put this in there, but it's not in there at the moment. You may not miss them for now. We have the grid left and right buttons there. Those are used, but those are used for a different purpose. When I show it to you, you'll understand, but they are in use. Of course, you have the pads area, which are the 4 banks I talked about. 64 pads in a 4x16 arrangement. Down in the bottom left, you have the first 4 buttons are your modes. Okay, so these are where you would switch the operating mode for the device. Unlike the knob mode, this actually affects the pads. So whereas the knob mode up here would affect these knobs, the pad mode, which are the first 4 buttons, affects what happens in the pad area. We have the shift mode buttons also. If you hold down shift, and I'm going to hold it down here, you'll see some of the buttons on the transport and around, on this whole line down here light up when I hold shift. And that's letting you know that whatever the labeled option is underneath the button is on. If I hold shift and look here, it says the metronome is on. I could press that. Now it's off. And when I let go of shift and I hit play, the metronome does not play. I could hit shift, metronome, and now the metronome plays. So all those functions work the same, or I should say they work as labeled. You have your overview is not implemented and accent is not implemented. But you can do a shift tap to do a tap tempo. You could do shift snap to turn off snap. You have shift metronome to turn on and off the metronome, wait for the countdown, or wait for input, countdown, and loop recording. So all those you can control holding down the shift button. You have the Alt button next. The Alt button will help you get into alternate modes. If you're looking at the screen now, you see it's lit along with drum. And so with those two being lit, I can tell you we're in Alt drum mode right now. And that's why you can see these pads the way they are. That's actually a feature of the mode, but we'll talk about that in more detail later. You also have the transport buttons down here. These also work as labeled. First button will take you from pattern mode into song mode. You have a play button, a stop button, and a record toggle. Now, when we're working in Fire NFX, the basic layout is going to be like you see in the slide, where the first 3 pads are a work area. And that's the area that's going to change the most as you move through the different modes. The red square on the slide, I don't know if you can read it clearly, but it says macro and nav, and that's the macro and nav grid. Okay, that will be that grid, that 4x4 grid will be where your macro buttons and your navigation buttons are located. A macro button could be something like a copy or activating a window. A navigation could be setting a root key for your scale or setting a preset up, a next or a previous sort of thing. So with that said, basically the way the macro grid is going to look, or the macro nav grid is going to look, is the first row is window navigation. The second row is undo, copy, cut, and paste. And I'm actually going to bring the grid online here. So now you can see how these first three pads are just drum pads or just generic pads that you could use. But this area here within my hands, that's your nav grid, okay? Your macro and nav grid. And so what we see there, and if we look at the slide above, the colors don't necessarily match. But if you look at in the slide right here, it shows the first four buttons are window navigation, and that reflects these buttons here, okay? So when you see that this first button is off, you know that you're in some form of a macro and navigation mode, because I can turn that off, and now you see this turned into a solid yellow section, because now this is being used not for macro or navigation, but instead for an extension of just giving you another drum pad to use. So we'll turn the macro nav back on, and there's various ones you could scroll through. You could see these buttons, the first two rows don't change, but the bottom two may change as I scroll through. Okay, and that's because it's giving me different functions down there. But the first two are the macros. They will always be there as is. So we've got your window navigation. We have undo, copy, cut, and paste. Those are always there. Below here, these change depending on the mode in which you need to operate and what you need to do. And we're going to talk about those specifically as we go on. So for now, that's the general layout and how to navigate or how to change your grid navigation here. But we're going to get into the meat and potatoes of it in upcoming videos. So hopefully you'll understand now the layout, what you're working with, and we can move on to the next section. Okay, guys, so let's just jump right in and talk about pattern mode, which used to be step mode, okay? So obviously, if you don't put a sticker over your label, you're going to call it step mode, but I call mine pattern mode. And if you recall, in the previous video, I told you how the work area right here is the first three 4x4 banks, and your macro and nav area over here is the last 4x4 bank, okay? So when we talk about the work area, within the work area, the first two rows represent the patterns. The second two rows represent the channels. Now, they do work in an up-down combination. So, like this pattern is selected. It only colors the top row. The bottom row is used to help you quickly understand the selected one. So if I was to go to that pattern, it lights up below to let me know that it's selected. You may have also noticed it switched channels automatically. And if you look in FL Studio, all of that was reflected. I'm going to go ahead and switch back to this, switch to this first pattern. And if you look in FL Studio, when I do this, a bunch of stuff is going to happen. Number one, it switched to the linked mixer channel for you. It switched to the pattern for you, obviously. And then the pattern was linked to the first instrument in the channel rack, and so that also got selected, and all of that is reflected within the Akai Fire device. As you move through just the channels you can see in FL Studio. It's moving through, highlighting the channel, and also highlighting and moving through the linked mixer channel, mixer rack for you. Okay, so that's what's going on there. Basically, what you would use this mode for is to navigate through your stuff, right? You're going to work in a pattern, you're going to work with channels, you're going to work in the mixer, and you can quickly kind of access things this way. So for example, if you were going to this green pattern, which is for my subs, let's say, right? I can control it as I mentioned in a previous video. Right here, I've got volume, pan, filter, and resonance, and I can click on the mixer mode, and then I've got the mixer volume, pan, low EQ, and high EQ. So for example, if I wanted to roll off some of the high EQ, I could just do this, and you could see the high EQ is being rolled off now. It's being controlled from here. I could go back to channel. Maybe I want to increase the volume. And if you look in FL Studio, where the channel rack is, it's highlighting where the knob area is that I'm tweaking. Okay, it's also being displayed on this tiny screen here. So using just this mode, I have access to every channel, every pattern, its volume, pan, filter, res, every mixer that's linked, its volume, pan, low EQ, and high EQ. So everything's quickly available. Now, there are 12 slots that you can fill. What happens if you have more than 12 patterns or more than 12 channels, which I actually happen to have in this project? Well, that's where these two sets of buttons. There's 2 buttons for each set. So there's 2 round buttons here for the patterns and 2 round buttons here for the channels. These are paging channels. So because the first one is lit in both sets, they're both on channel 1. If I hit the down button here, it's going to go to channel 2. And if you notice, it's only listing 3 patterns, because if I was to go down to my patterns in FL Studio, you could see that it's listing the 3 that weren't on the first page, right? And that light is now lit, meaning there's 2 lights, so we're on page 2. Let me go back to page 1. You can see it remembers which one is selected. Now let's say you were to select a pattern that was on page 2 with the mouse. The script will attempt to follow where you go. So you notice I clicked on that pattern with the mouse, and a few things happened all at once. It switched over to the correct page to show me the pattern. It also switched to the correct page to show me the channel, because the channel that it was highlighting would have also occurred on the next page. So it's following where it needs to be. You could still page up and select channels and work with channels individually as needed. But I just wanted to show you how it will follow and watch where you need to be. Now, if you notice, when I clicked on, if I go page up on the channels and you look in FL Studio, it's going to draw a red square around the channels that are within that list. And then there's another square, a rectangle rather, around the individual channel that is selected. So I'm going to do that again. I'm going to go to the previous page. Let me do this. Oh, I'm sorry. We have to make sure that FL Studio is always active. Okay, but I'm going to page down, and you're going to see it highlighted in the channel rack the 6 channels that appear on the secondary page. If I page up, it's now highlighting the 12 channels that appear on the first page. Okay, and it's also, in that scenario, was highlighting the channel that was also active. Within the work area, you can select a pattern, obviously, by clicking on it. That jumps to the pattern. But you can also select patterns by clicking the secondary row. So as I click this row, you could see that lights are staying on down here. Even though I'm currently in this pattern here, these lights are staying on because if you look in FL Studio, it may be hard to see, but some of these patterns here have the selection box around it. So I've actually got 1, 2, 3, 4 patterns selected. Then what I can do is I can go into an alternate pattern mode. So if I hold Alt Pattern, what it's done is it's taken those 4 selected patterns, and now I can choose to only work within those. Even though in FL Studio I could see all my patterns, here on the device I'm focused on just these 4 patterns. So I can use and maneuver just those 4 patterns. To go back to all patterns, I just hit pattern mode again. It'll clear out the Alt, and I'm back to all my patterns, and I can still see the ones that are selected. To deselect, you would just go to a selection and click it, and it will deselect it. Now, the channels do not work that way. The channels have a slightly separate operation. The way the channels work is if you click on a channel color, it obviously switches to it, or if you even click the below, it switches to it. But if you click it a second time, these buttons have functions. So like the first one, the top one, that will bring up the plugin window for you. And you can click it again to hide the plugin window. If the plugin window is open and you switch to a different plugin, it'll close that plugin window for you. And you can then bring up the new plugin window if needed. Okay, another feature is the bottom button brings up the piano roll for that plugin. If you wanted to switch to another plugin's piano roll, you know, sometimes you go into a pattern and you're in the wrong piano roll. You could see the ghost notes sitting there. Well, if you saw that in this scenario, actually maybe we can even show you that. So I might be here in this channel, and you can see the piano roll. I'm in the wrong channel for the piano roll, but to get there, I would just click on the channel I want, and it brings it right in. So with the piano roll open and you move to different channels, it doesn't close the piano roll for you. It just brings up that channel's piano roll so you can start working in it. If you want to close the piano roll, you just click it again, and then it will close. So that's how you control the piano roll. Yeah, so the channel section also respects. If you look in FL Studio, there's a channel display filter, and it can be set to all, which it is currently at. But let's say I set it to audio, right? If I set it to audio, now all of a sudden I only have one channel in here. And if you look at my device, my FL Studio is showing me what pattern I'm in, but it's also showing me, hey, these are the only channels you have available. Now, if you bring up a channel for an audio device, you can bring up the piano roll. But if you bring up the channel itself, you'll get the sampler instead of a plugin, which I guess is what you would expect. Let's say we set this thing instead to automation mode, right? So I happen to have one automation here, and you could look the channel mode, channel strip rather, changed, and now all I can see is my automation. If I bring up that window, it's an automation editor. So now I can bring up my automation editors very easily. I'm going to go ahead and say all. And again, I can page down and I have all my things, my samples, my plugins, my FPCs, everything I need. With respect to the channels, if you have multiple channels that are linked to the same mixer router, you'll see a dim light below them. So this is the selected channel here, but the two next to it, hopefully you can see in the video, they're dimly lit. I have to say the video is a little too bright, these lights, so it's not a clear representation of what I'm actually looking at. But the reason I did that is so that within a pattern, you'll know, for example, if you're dealing with a guitar part and you know you have 2 or 3 guitars and they're all linked to the same mixer, you'd know which those were. In this case, they're next to each other just because I cloned them, but they could potentially be anywhere, and you would be able to tell which other channels are linked via the same mixer router. Okay, I think that pretty much does it, except for there are some navigations that we need to talk about. So let me talk about those because they're going to be used in the upcoming modes as well as in this mode to a degree. So we're going to talk about this navigation grid right here. So the first row, by the way, you know when the navigation grid is active because this first button here will always be off. This is an off state button. And the next three buttons will always be roughly the same color. One may be lit, as you can see here, but otherwise they'd be the same color. Okay. These toggle the three main windows, what I call the three main windows in FL Studio. But this first one that is blank will close a bunch of windows for you. So you can see all the windows that closed in FL Studio, and then I manually closed the channel rack there. But you'll notice when the windows are closed, these buttons are all dim. When I bring up the mixer, it now lights up the third button because that's the mixer button. The middle is the playlist. Now you can see it's highlighted the playlist because the playlist is actually active, but the mixer is still a light blue or light cyan because it's still on the screen. When I remove it, this button goes completely away, so I know that the mixer is not visible. So I can tell, and let me bring up the channel rack, which I put over my browser just to utilize that space. But with this, you could tell which window is active, which is super important, okay? And the reason why it's super important is because the window, the next four buttons below are undo, copy, cut, and paste. So what that means is if I wanted to undo, undo is undo. You know what that does. If I wanted to copy, cut, or paste, knowing what window you're in is important because that's where the copy, the cut, or the paste is going to occur. If you look on my screen, you can see I actually have a piano roll. I'll bring it up with some data in it. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and you can see my windows here. I don't see, if I hit the cut now, you can see it cut what was in the piano roll because the piano roll was active. Okay, I'm going to undo that. But if the piano roll is not up, it's going to work on the active channel, which currently you can see it has the data. So if I hit cut now, let's see what happens. Nothing happened. And why is that? Well, the reason is it's not on the channel rack. You have to make sure your correct window is active before you copy, cut, or paste. So now when I cut, you can see it cut the notes as expected. Now I could go to a different channel and hit paste. I could actually go to a couple different channels and just paste that thing around it. Now I've not looked at my computer screen. I'm just doing all the work from here. Okay? Now I could look up just to make sure things are going where they need to. But my point is I haven't had to touch my mouse or my keyboard, and I'm able to navigate, cut, copy, paste. Okay? So these first two rows will always be there when your macro grid or your navigation grid is active. Okay? Below, you have sets of buttons that do navigational things. Okay? If you notice this first two, they work in up and down pairs. So this first two actually mirrors your channel colors. As I move to a channel, this one changes to mirror it. And the reason is this is actually a duplicate of what these buttons do. So this will bring up your plugin and your piano roll, just like if you pressed over here. The reason why they're duplicated here is you may be in note mode or drum mode and want to bring up the current channel. And you can do that by utilizing these keys. So you won't see the channels here in some of the other modes, but you'll be able to access that channel from here. The next two are the yellow ones. Those actually set the step snap rather in your FL Studio. So you can up or down, and it'll cycle through the list. If the step is this area here where you could see I'm moving the mouse within FL Studio. So it's currently set to half step. If I push this down, it's set to step. And I can see on this screen also what it is. So I don't have to look at the computer screen. So I can go through line, cell, none, 1/6, 1/4 step, 1/3 step, 1/4 beat. All these are there. I'm going to leave it to, let's just put it at 1/2 beat. Okay, so I could see it here on the screen and we're all good. These next two buttons here are blank because they're not used in this mode. The next two buttons here are the preset selector. So let's say you're in a, let me bring up this one. This is my 808s, right? I can hit preset down and you'll see it'll go down and go through my presets. So I can navigate my presets using this these buttons. So just from this mode now, remember, this is pattern mode. I have full navigational access. I can go presets. I can see piano rolls. I can set my snap. I can do copy, cut, repeat. I can activate and deactivate windows. I know which windows are active by looking at my pads here. It's very powerful. And I've only shown you the first nav grid. Let's go to the next nav grid. The next nav grid we have here is actually slightly different layout. If you notice these white keys in the form of an upside down T, or what I like to call like a Tetris piece, these actually represent up, down, left, and right. Red is escape, green is enter, and the two cyan buttons are shift tab and tab. So you can actually, for example, I'm in my channel rack right now. I can use these arrow keys, and if I hit arrow down, you'll see it's navigating through the channels for me. And it's being followed here on the device as well. But this is letting me go through channels. If I do left and right, it lets me do patterns. So just even within this mode, I can even granularly navigate. This mode might be even more handy though, like let's say you were in the playlist. So now I've activated the playlist right here. Now when I go up and down, I'm going through those patterns there. Let's say in the mixer, I can go left and right. It goes one channel at a time. If I go up or down, it goes like a page at a time. Using this method, I can actually get to the master and then control the master volume, no problem. The master pan and other things using the knobs. The tabs buttons here will take you through the window. So you can see how if I tab back and forth, it's going between those two windows. Now on the playlist, I do want to show you what I call a secret feature. Well, actually, it's not a secret feature. Let me show you the regular feature first. If you press pattern up or down, it navigates to the different patterns. But if you press shift pattern up or down, it navigates channels for you. So there's another way to navigate patterns and channels. Now, the hidden feature is if you have the playlist activated and you hold down Alt pattern up or down, you'll see it's shrinking. It can zoom in and zoom out for you. So I can bring all of my things into view, and then if you hold grid left or right while holding Alt, you can zoom in the other direction. So you can see how that works. And by the way, that also works when a playlist is active. I'm sorry, when a piano roll is active. Let's go into this piano roll, and I'll just show you. I can shrink and grow and do what I need to do. All from this device so far, okay? Let's close that piano roll. Okay, so that's what I call the up, down, left, right navigation, okay? And you could tell by the green and the layout. I mean, the layout will show you. So we also have, in this mode, if these two grid lights are off, if you notice whenever there's a navigation, these grid lights are on. If the lights are off, that means the grid is now gone. There's no navigation or macros in there. What it's done now is instead of putting these guys on the second page, it's just extended this out to operate without a grid, without a nav grid. So if you wanted to, if the nav grid was just in your way, you didn't like it, you could just turn it off. Now these are channels, navigations. These are pattern navigations, and you can do what you need to do. And I believe that covers pretty much all of pattern mode.